All right, hello and welcome into another edition of 8Sports Night Talk. I'm your host, Nolan Knight. Thanks so much for joining us here on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on our website, WRNCnow.com. I have the Facebook page pulled up here. If you have any comments or questions about my thoughts on things going on around the college football world or college basketball now that we get into basketball season, feel free to do that. We got a busy slate of things to talk about this week. A little slower week now that college football is done with, Virginia Tech and Virginia's season coming to a close. Virginia Union season now has come to a close as well. And we're kind of shifting our focus now into the world of, college basketball here in the city of Richmond. We're going to begin, though, with some football because Virginia Union, their magical run and season comes to a close, and what a year it was for them. They fall to Valdosta State 49-14. The Blazers, the number one team in the country. Virginia Union, they were underdogs going into this game. They, of course, had the best season in school history. They've been playing football over there on the campus of Virginia Union for over 100 years, right? And this is the best season they have ever had. I mean, it was historical what they were able to do with Jada Byers and Reginald Vick, R.J. Rosales. I mean, they had some great talent, and it culminated on a back-to-back CIAA championship. They go on the road, win a playoff game at Wingate. They go on the road, win a second-round game when they hadn't even won a single playoff game before at Lenore Ryan. And then, of course, their season ends in southern Georgia to Valdosta State in a game where, really they just couldn't get drives to continue. They tried their best to keep Jada Byers into the game. He had 22 carries, had another 100-yard game, scored a touchdown. I mean, the players that made an impact on Saturday at Valdosta State were the same players that had been the reason that they were there. So I almost am happy to see, those guys get their flowers, and then the awards have just been pouring in. Jada Byers was named the HBCU Offensive Player of the Year today, and the Touchdown Club of Richmond voted head coach Alvin Parker the Coach of the Year. I mean, all the flowers deserving for Virginia Union after the magical and impressive season that they had, and that's kind of why I wanted to start the show out with Virginia Union and give them the flowers for the incredible season that they had over on the campus of Virginia Union. It does come to a close. They finished the year 10-3. They're CIAA champions. They made it to the NCAA quarterfinals. Very impressive stuff. It'll be interesting to see what head coach Alvin Parker can do next year now that they lose a lot of their talent. Jada Byers, of course, he'll be graduating possibly. I hope he gets a chance at the NFL level, at least to make a training camp and to see what he can do at that next level. His stats are there as a kick returner, punt returner, as a running back, receiving back. I mean, he has the ability to play at that next level. He finishes his career at Virginia Union with the most career rushing yards in school history. So pretty awesome stuff over there on the campus of Virginia Union. All right, let's get to the down and dirty here. Talk some college football playoff on last night. The College Football Playoff Committee got together, or I think it was Sunday actually, and announced their 12-team playoff, the first one of this era that we've all been waiting for. We've talked about this for 5 years now. This has been a discussion for 5 years, what this was going to look like, when we were going to get to that. I mean, we've been waiting on this playoff committee and on this playoff bracket to come out for half a decade now. And they've made rule changes to it before even seeing it for the first time. So, things are going to look different as we get there. But here we are. We finally have come to the conclusion of this thing. We have the 12 teams. There's no more debating about who's getting in and who's getting out, which has, in my mind, been the most frustrating thing with this playoff committee since the playoffs began with 4 teams in 2014, was the debate of who was going to get in and who was going to get out. And here we have it. Oregon's the top number 1 seed, deservingly. Georgia's number 2 after their impressive season. Boise State gets in as a group of 5, highest-ranked team. They get a bye at 3. Arizona State sneaks in with a bye. And, of course, Clemson gets the last college football playoff automatic bid with their win over SMU on Saturday. SMU, they got paired up at 11. They'll be facing off against Penn State in Happy Valley. That's going to be awesome. I mean, we'll get to that in a second. Notre Dame, they'll be hosting Indiana in South Bend. That's going to be awesome. Tennessee, they'll travel to Columbus to play Ohio State in a playoff game. I mean, that's going to be awesome. These matchups are so intriguing. Clemson on the road at Texas. when you step back and not think about all of this, who gets in, who got left out, and look at these matchups and what we're going to see in the next couple of weeks, Indiana at Notre Dame, SMU at Penn State, Clemson at Texas, Tennessee at Ohio State. Take a step back and look at those matchups. And what it does is it gets you excited, right? We've had so many playoff-type games. That ACC championship last Saturday, Clemson versus SMU, that was a playoff game. The Clemson's not in the playoffs if they don't win that game. They got their way in. That win of Syracuse's big win over Miami got Clemson into that matchup. We've had so many games that meant so much more than we ever have in the college football world over the past couple of weeks, and it's been a lot, and it's been interesting to see the discourse that's gone on, especially with the SEC. Lane Kiffin lobbying for his team to get in, Nick Saban lobbying for Alabama's sake to get in, South Carolina and Shane Beamer lobbying to get into the playoff, and that is what I think kind of spoils this whole thing in terms of just the excitement level, because there's almost a distraction when we're talking about what should be an exciting playoffs. What should be can't wait to see these games has now turned into, did this team deserve to get in? How do we change this so that the most deserving teams get in? Instead of actually talking about these games and these matchups that are going to take place, they'll be talking about Alabama missing the college football playoff until the first kickoff comes in a couple of weeks. And that, I think, is why there's something needs to change. In my mind, I personally, in my opinion, believe that we got to find a way to make this objective. The subjectivity of all of this, of debating whether who gets in and who gets out, is what is kind of taking away from the excitement level of this 12-team playoff that we've been looking forward to for years now. The debate of who got gypped out of this, right, is kind of getting in the way of talking about the matchups of Clemson going on the road to Texas, right? And so I think if we can figure out a way that you say the top 4 teams that finish in the SEC get in, boom, that's what it is. No debating. The top 4 teams, they got in. The top 2 teams out of the ACC, they get in. No debating. They're in, right? We got to get rid of these debates and stuff. Otherwise, it's going to be this big show, right? And maybe that's what they want. That's why they release it with a dedicated show on Sunday and why they do a dedicated show every Monday. Maybe they do want the debates and the rankings. But the one thing about the BCS, which I liked personally, was the fact that this is what it is. You can't debate it. That's what it is. We're in the playoffs. Let's go play football. And that's what you have in the NFL, right, with divisions. And I think with these massive conferences where coaches are complaining about strength of schedules, well, Indiana, they played in the Big Ten, and their strength of schedule was horrible. Whereas a team like Ohio State that played everybody, their strength of schedule was really good. And just because it's by conference, with these 16, 18-team conferences, not everybody can play everybody anymore, whereas you had with divisions. Everyone got rid of their divisions. I think the way this kind of fixes itself is that you go back to divisions. I think that's going to create a system of where the best teams are getting in. The way it sits right now with the objectivity and people having to debate and discuss, and you have this this hidden room where everyone discusses who's going to get in and who's going to get out, and there's leaks coming out, I think it's a distraction to what is supposed to be a really, really good product. I mean, when you look at these matchups, the winner between Penn State and SMU, I'm most excited about that game. Goes on to play Boise State, who's been waiting for this moment forever. I mean, that's getting kind of shuffled under the rug. The storylines in this are incredible, and we're not even talking about them because we're talking about who got screwed out of a playoff position. Boise State has been trying to compete for a national championship since 2006 with the Fiesta Bowl, Statue of Liberty play, right? They've been waiting for this moment to prove that they can compete for a national championship for years. Following that success, they had that big season where they started with Virginia Tech and won that game. Boise State started that season ranked 3rd in the country. To give you an idea of how long Boise State has waited for this moment to compete for a national championship, they finished their season. Their only loss is to the number 1 team, and they only lost to them by 1 score. I mean, Boise State deserves to be here, and Ashton Genty possibly may win the Heisman. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But we finally get this moment with Boise State after 2 decades of waiting to see if Boise State can actually be ranked high enough to get into the playoffs. They tried to do that back back in 2008 with that Boise State team. And Arizona State, they were picked to finish last in the Big 12, and now they're the conference champion. I mean, the highlights and excitement around this playoffs and the storylines are so good. But I'm afraid that the conversation of Alabama not getting in and SMU getting in is the problem. In my opinion, I think the committee got it right. I mean, SMU finished their regular season 11-1. How do you not put in a team that's 11-1? And they lost their conference championship to a perennial power in Clemson, who's kind of got it together as well. And I think they'll be a good matchup against Texas. So it'll be interesting to see what happens the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping that we get away from this conversation of, who got gypped out of this thing and who got in. But at the end of the day, when you look at these matchups, especially the first round matchups where you have these, home atmospheres for the first round games, it's going to be awesome. I mean, it's going to be something that we've never seen before, quite frankly. And that's what's most exciting about this whole thing is that it's brand new. And I would like to see it finish out before we talk about changing the rules of, how we decide who gets in or how many teams do we go to 16, teams. Let's wait and see how the first one goes. That's what I think's been frustrating about this whole thing to begin with is, we've been waiting to see who gets in or who gets out. And now that we finally have it, I'm so excited to see that get underway. So that kind of wraps my thoughts on the college football playoff. I think we got to figure out a way to do it objectively. This idea of this secret committee that meets behind closed doors and there's leaks that go out, that's not the right way how we should decide who gets into a national championship caliber playoff, right? There's got to be a way that if you meet this criteria, and this criteria, you get in. Or if, the top two teams in the ACC conference record get in automatically. And then there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You win your game, you get in, like the NFL does. And quite frankly, if we're going to have this expanded playoff, I think that's the way to do it. The old way wouldn't have been that horrible either. I mean, I don't think anyone would say that, Oregon versus Georgia for a national championship game with not another game played, that's how it would have been before. And it's an interesting thought that it would just be Oregon and Georgia, and that would be that. How different it is now is very interesting. And with college football changing so much, I feel like we can't really have any big discussions or opinions on things until we see how the first one goes. I think Nick Saban was kind of talking about it last week that, we're going to learn so much from this, and I couldn't agree more. We're going to think much differently about the playoffs today, a day after the selection show, than we would once this thing is all said and done. And I'll be interested to see what the conversation is about it after we've crowned an NCAA national champion. What's interesting is that the ACC kind of lucked out of this whole thing. They get two teams in, kind of solidifying themselves, maybe above the Big 12 conference, who doesn't even have a team ranked higher than 12th in the country. So big win for the ACC. I think that's a takeaway that should not be, forgotten about, that they need to try to have a seat at the table in this thing, and to have two teams in for them is very important moving forward, especially, for our state with Virginia and Virginia Tech. So in terms of who I think my favorites are in this tournament, it's got to be Oregon. I think Oregon's been the best football team all season. And I'm excited to see some of these matchups. What I really like is that there aren't really any matchups between conference opponents, if Georgia wins and goes to the semifinals, they'll play Penn State. The only conference versus conference matchup you kind of really see is if Ohio State beats Tennessee. So excited to see for the playoffs. But let's go ahead and move forward. We'll talk a little high school football. Let's get some video going here. Varina is headed to the Class 4 state championship game in Liberty on Saturday at 5:30. I will be in attendance at Liberty. We'll have full coverage of Varina's matchup against the team Phoebus. It's a big storyline. They're taking on Phoebus on Saturday at Liberty, 5:30. Phoebus, if you don't know, they have won 4 straight state championships. Or it might be 3. Their winning streak is over 40 games. I have the exact number in my phone here. Let me pull it up so I don't get these numbers wrong. Yeah, 4 straight state championships for the Phoebus Phantoms. 48 straight wins for Phoebus. Think about that. That's 4 graduating classes. I mean, there are JV players on this team that have never lost a game that are now seniors going off to college for Phoebus, and that's who Varina has to face off against. On Saturday, I was out at Varina. They were taking on Tuscarora, and they took care of business, dominated. 28-0 win for the Blue Devils in this game. They did it on offense. They did it on defense. The Huskies have a really good defensive line. They made a couple of really good plays like that one you just saw on your screen there. But Varina just kind of got it done. I mean, they have so much talent. Their offensive line's really good. Their defensive line is incredible. This was only my third time seeing Varina play in person, and it was impressive to see how fast they fly around. I mean, look at that. I mean, they play with so much hype and excitement. It's been a lot of fun to cover them this year. Of course, their only loss was to an Indian River team out in Chesapeake in overtime to start the year, and I've talked with Mark Lewis about that loss. And he's talked about how it was the best thing that could have happened to them. Kind of let them know that, hey, we can't take any teams for granted. We got to show up ready to fight in every game, and that's exactly what we've seen from them this year. And now they got their biggest test of the year and an undefeated Phoebus team that has won 48 straight games. I'll have full coverage from Lynchburg on Saturday night. Right here on 8 News. The other state championship game is Essex. The Trojans get a massive win on the road over Alta Vista last Saturday. They dominated the game. 30-8 was the final in that matchup, and now they will take on Grayson County in the Class 1 state championship. That's going to be set for that's in Salem at the Stag Bowl. Of course, if you're not familiar with that stadium, that's where they've played the Division III National Championship for years. I think they have moved it recently. But for a long time, the Division III National Championship was played at that historic Salem Stadium, and that's where Essex is headed to take on a Grayson County team that hasn't lost a game all year either. So the Trojans in the state championship. I'll have the highlights courtesy of our sister station in Roanoke, and then I'll have the full coverage from the Varina State Championship game on Salem on Saturday night as well. All right, moving our attention now to a little Washington Commanders football. Don't think we have the stats for them. Essentially, they kind of won the bye week. They didn't play this past week. Dallas lost. A couple teams won. They're setting up pretty. I thought we had some notes for them, but we'll go ahead and talk a little VCU before we get out of here. The Rams win their 4th straight game, taking down Penn 66-47. 19-point win. They've been dominating. The last 4 wins. They got a 7-point win over an ACC team in Miami, a 40-point win over Division II Elizabeth City State, a 35-point win over Georgia Southern, and then a 19-point win over Penn. What's interesting about this win over Penn is that they actually went down in net rating because they didn't cover what their expected win numbers were. They were expected to win by 24. They win by 19 and went down in the net rankings. And that kind of goes to show why those 2 losses at the Charleston Classic, I think, could really come back to screw VCU at the end of the year if they don't win the A-10 conference tournament. So what's up next for VCU is that they go on the road, win 2 games that were in the tournament last year. Colorado State, they were a part of the NCAA field last year. New Mexico was a part of the NCAA tournament field last year. Because VCU didn't perform all that well at Charleston Classic, these 2 next games for them poise very, very important. Especially when we look at the end of the year, if March rolls around and VCU, has a 22-23 win season, they got to have some big net wins against good opponents on the road, neutral site, and that's exactly what's coming up as this West Coast trip comes along. They'll face off against Colorado State this weekend, or let me make sure it's this weekend. It might be, yes, on Saturday at 7:30. That's a neutral site game. They'll be playing that game in New Mexico, actually, or Las Vegas, excuse me. They'll be playing that game in Las Vegas, and then from there, they will then stay out on the West Coast, and then they'll play at New Mexico. So these are 2 big, important games for VCU. New Mexico this season is off to a 7-3 start, and, of course, Colorado State is off to a, let's see here, not as good of a start, 5-4. But, 2 NCAA tournament teams from a year ago. Joe Bamisile has been incredible. He had a double-double last night. Max Shulga's been the A-10 player of the year like he was expected to be, 14 points and 7 boards for him. And it's been an impressive start to the season for VCU. Really wish they could have got one of those better wins at that Charleston Classic tournament. VCU, of course, lost their 2 games there to Nevada and Seton Hall, both by just 3 points. Both came down to 1 possession at the end of the game. So we got a lot of basketball left to play with VCU, but when you look at this A-10 conference and whatnot, you got to try to find where you're going to get these net wins, these quad one wins. And right now, there's currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My apologies. 5 teams with over 8 wins in the conference. Here, let me pull up the browser so you can see what I'm looking at here. St. Bonaventure 9-1, Loyola Chicago 8-0, Rhode Island 9-0. George Washington's 8-2. There's VCU at 8-2. So there are, if these teams don't eat each other alive, VCU could kind of benefit from a stronger A10 this year. But what's important is that they got to go on the road and win these 2 matchups. In terms of Richmond, they've really struggled. They're 4-5 to start the season. They of course had to play at Auburn over the weekend. They lost 98-54, but this Auburn team, I think, could compete in the G League. I mean, they have so much talent, it's ridiculous. Next up for the Spiders, they will host Belmont on Saturday, and then they'll travel to William & Mary next week for their rivalry matchup. So they got some wins coming up on their schedule, but they kind of got to get some momentum before this conference slate starts because, as mentioned, the A10 looks really good this year. They could easily be a multi-bid league in the NCAA tournament. If ECU wants to be one of those teams, I think it's really important that they go 2-0 on this road trip to the West Coast. All right, but that's going to about wrap things up here for 8 Sports Nightcap. Thanks so much for tuning in this week and every single week. As the season progresses, we're going to start having some guests on here to kind of talk about some different things going on around the college basketball world, as now we've kind of closed the door on football. I think the only thing we have left for football is, of course, the Commanders in the playoffs, and then, of course, Virginia Tech's bowl game against Minnesota on January 4th in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. The winner of that, the head coach, gets doused in mayo. So I'm excited to see what happens with that. But thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of 8 Sports Nightcap. We'll see you later tonight at 11 o'clock. Good night, guys.